Welcome back, fellow adventurers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today, we will explore the realm of board game design with the ingenious James Hudson. As a board game publisher and designer, James is the creative force behind Druid City Games, where he orchestrates memorable gaming experiences that prioritize authentic connections and shared enjoyment. With acclaimed titles like Tidal Blades, Heroes of the Reef, and Sorcerer City under his belt, James is a master at crafting immersive worlds that transport players to fantastical realms. So, please join us as we explore the art of world building for board games and uncover the secrets behind James's innovative designs. James, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
No, for sure. I'm really excited because I am a big fan of the games that you put out. Me and my son have played a hell of a lot of Tidal Blades, and we pull out Grimm Forest whenever the friends are over, so I got lots to pick your brain about.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Today we're talking world building, but before we dig into the topic of the day, I want to just ground with, who is James? How did you fall in love with games? How did they influence you as a child? And then kind of your journey, because I know you were in marketing for a while, so we kind of share that background. I want to know, how did you get to where you are today? What were the ups and downs?
I'll give you because I don't know if you've watched any of my videos, or I'm pretty wordy. So I'll give you the truncated version. It's one of those things where I grew up on Blizzard games, loved all the old school Warcraft, StarCraft stuff, Windows 95 on the computer, and you're uploading the RTS stuff. And so grew up on that, played tons of Warcraft, had a guild, did all the raiding back in the World of Warcraft days. And then I had some buddies that I raided with who were just like, hey, you should come over for board game night. And my only experience playing games as a kid was like, I played Risk once or twice, played Monopoly a couple times. Didn't really have any love for board games in that way from a childhood perspective. And that was exactly what it says. Like, I don't want to play Monopoly with you guys. Like, we don't play Monopoly. We play stuff that's way more fun than that. And plus there'll be beer. And I was like, well, all right, you got me a beer.
Right.
And so then we went and we played Power Grid. Fell in love. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know board games could do this. This is amazing. Then obviously I went down the rabbit hole, right? We didn't have a real good FLGS in my town. So I went to the local Barnes and Noble, went to town got like 10 games, like all good gamers do. I over purchase, I purchased with my heart, not my mind.
Yep. And
that sent me down the path there. I've always been a creative in trying to think outside the box, even within the corporate world, as you're talking about in marketing. I feel like I always kind of butted up against the wall in corporate America, right? Because you're like, hey, I have ideas on how to make this company better or how to do my job better. Well, that doesn't fit inside our little narrow scope. And you're like, yeah, but like, in a short story, I was in sales and marketing, and I had a customer, like we had like 80 products at this company. So we had 80 different reps that would call you about each individual product because they felt like it had to be micromanaged or the individual products would fall apart. And I was like, listen, this is not the way people want to do business. We are actually hurting ourselves having all these people call the same person. We need to take the person with the best relationship with that person, and they need to sell them everything. And if some stuff doesn't get sold, it's already they're not buying everything, right? And my boss is like, no, there's no way. That'll ruin everything. So finally, the subverter that I am, I'd already talked to somebody at a big company who was like, I only want to deal with you. And until they come around to that, I'm just not even going to buy anything. So I set up a whole thing where I was like, I want to go out there and I want to pitch them this really big package. And the number that I threw out for the company at the time was really big. And they're like, there's no way they'll do that. And so I was like, let me go do it. They say no. And I eventually said, I'll pay for my own trip, because this was out like across the country, right? And if I don't get the thing, I pay for my own trip. So no risk to the company. And so my boss finally was like, fine. So I came back with that deal. And not only did I get to do the haha, I told you so, but at that moment, my boss said, maybe you're right. Maybe we should do it different. And from that moment forward, they actually changed it to a relationship-based selling instead of product-based selling. And, I'll never get the credit for that. He took the credit, obviously, because that's what bosses do.
That's how.
But that's on the creative side. I tell that story to get into the side of, at the time, that's when I started making Barnyard Roundup. That was my first game, because I just love making stuff. There's something addictive about making things. Like, you make content, right? And when you see that finished product put out there and people connect with it, it does something for you. And it's the same way with board games. It's just a different format. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am. And now we're 11 or 13 or 16 Kickstarter games into it.
Right on. So cool. What game is next? I'm jumping way ahead, but I'm curious, and I need to know what's in the hopper that you can talk about.
Sure. No, I don't. I can't talk about it. If I've got a contract in place, I can talk about it. Board games, we're not like doing reveals at Comic-Con, right? Yeah. Like the whole breaking news. I don't think that really applies to us.
Cool.
So the next game is called Madcala. So you're like, that sounds like a game I've heard of, Madcala, before, right? Manny Tremblay, who is the artist for Wonderland's War and Dice Throne, some of those little games you've heard of.
Yeah.
He's also a designer. And so he kind of really, I don't want to say specializes, but his brain really works in that 1v1 area, which is why Dice Throne is there. And Madcala is a play on Madcala, but it's 1v1 combat using a Madcala mechanic. And it's themed in Wonderland's War because it is the Mad Hatter's preferred board game.
Oh, nice.
So, meta to that world, that's kind of what we were going for. So that was going to be next. We've been at Dice Tower West, and I think he was at PAX East. We've shown off a prototype, played that a little bit with some folks. Hoping for that to kind of go to Kickstarter in July. I've got one of those preview pages up that people can go follow. If they just search Madcala on Kickstarter, you can do the whole follow to see when it launches thing.
I'll throw the links in the comments too, so
cool.
People can find it the easy way. I would love to pick apart the mechanics side of board games. In fact, I'm sure I'll beg you to come back someday and we can talk mechanics, because I do that too. But today we're talking world building. That's world building is one of my biggest obsessions. So I am so happy to have you here to talk about that. Let's start broad. Let's start big picture here.
Sure.
When you're getting into the creative process of coming up with world building, creating characters, lore, narrative, whatever it is for a board game specifically, how do you begin conceptualizing and fleshing all this out? What is the starting point?
So I think that's going to be a different answer for every different creator, first of all, right? I think everybody's inspired and kind of has a different process. I even see that just in the mechanics side of board games. Is it theme first? Is it mechanic first? For me, I think it's typically there's usually some spark, right? There's some little idea, and from that idea, then it just kind of snowballs. So if, let's say, the idea was, in this world, there's magic, right? But to fuel the magic, you have to burn a memory. So you literally lose something of yourself to power your magic ability. So like you're a fire mage, but like every time you cast a spell, a memory goes away. So then you take that idea and then you kind of build around it. Well, what kind of world is it? And what would the fallout of that be, that you've got all these magic users running around that can't remember their past, or big chunks of their past. And what does that, so it just starts to kind of snowball, right? And then you're like, well, these things would happen, or the world would look like this if nobody could remember much history. Or is it all just magic users, or is there only a part of the world magic users? And in general, I think something about the visuals start to kick in at some point, right? Like in that process, like in your mind, you start to build out, what does this world look like? And then you try to, convey that to the art team. And in my case, I work very, very closely with several of the artists, but the main art, like if you're talking about Tidal Blades, is Mr. Cunnington, which is David and Lena. I don't know if most people know that because their moniker, Mr. Cunnington is a moniker. And this is a husband-wife combo, actually, from Canada.
Yeah.
Who they like to live kind of behind the scenes. They don't go to cons. They don't travel. They just like to stay in their village and make art and build worlds. And so it's, working closely with them, they actually came to me with, there's a long story there, again, truncate it for the sake of time, but essentially I had a couple games. I was like, I actually asked them if they wanted to do an Alice in Wonderland type game. They said, no, thank you. They're like, we're tired. We're sick and tired of taking, contract work on what people want, right? We want to build our own worlds. We're world builders. And I was like, cool. Well, I've got 2 games. I can strip the theme off of those. And you give me a good enough, cool enough world that I think will sell into the marketplace, and we'll go forward with it. Mm-hmm. And so they gave me their first scene, and this is their first thing they wanted to show me, was Dust standing on the dock, which ended up being the cover art for Tidal Blades 1.
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, whatever you guys want. I mean, I already knew they were incredibly talented in whatever they came up with. As long as it wasn't like another zombie thing or something, I was pretty much going to be in. So, even within my own team and like what I was describing, it can kind of vary where your inspiration comes from. Bloodstone, I don't know how familiar you are with that one.
Not terribly, no.
Bloodstone was, there's a lot of drama around that one. We launched it in 2021, mm-hmm. and we canceled it, but it was at $300,000. People were very upset. That was twice the funding goal. Why did you cancel it? It just wasn't going the way we wanted. We actually had days where we lost money. People were not happy with the way that we had laid things out. And it was pretty expensive because it was right before, it was right as COVID was rolling out and the wood shortage kicked in, right? From all the toilet paper and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so like 8-10 days before we launched, my manufacturer came back and said, hey, we're really sorry, but we have to give you a new quote for this production. And it went up a lot. And we were like, well, nothing we can do about this. I guess we just increased the price to match their price increase. And it just didn't jive, right? Short story long, I was inspired to make that world based off watching Titan's Grave from Will Wheaton.
Yeah.
That was on Geek and Sundry, because it was the first time I'd ever seen, I think it's the Dragon Age or Fantasy Age RPG system, mm-hmm. where you roll 3d6, and if you got stunts and you get all this crits and stuff to happen. And it's like, man, that would be, I could turn that into some sort of board game mechanic. And that's where one of the main, it was at least strongly influenced from that RPG system. So yeah, what we consume also gives us lots of inspiration for world building. Like I'm audio booking N.K. Jemisin right now, the 5th season. Mm-hmm. Like, there's lots of fun board game ideas in here. So yeah.
Very cool. Your brain never stops, eh, man?
I think if you're creative, it doesn't, but I definitely think you go through lulls, especially if your personal life has things going on that drain you of your energy. You don't pump out as much stuff as you would normally. So, yeah. But yeah, it's typically on.
You mentioned Mr. Cuddington. I'm a huge fan of the two of them. Santorini, I loved the stuff they've done for Roxley. And then when I saw Tidal Blades and I saw their name attached, I already liked what you guys were doing with other stuff, but that was like hook, line, and sinker. I was there. So Tidal Blades is cool. But on that topic, though, of the idea of the art and the theme and the visuals, and even tying into the marketing work that you do, the stuff you do is all really tight and cohesive to the voice of the world or the hook or the theme of the world. I'm curious, how do you maintain that cohesion? Is there an actual formulatic process you have from your days back in corporate world, or is it more of just somebody with a vision that takes the reins?
I don't know. I put a lot of effort into theme and narration and that voice, that line that goes all the way through, because I think that just makes a better story. How many times, I think Game of Thrones, great example, right? We have 7, 8 seasons of beautiful, awesome storytelling. And then because that through line wasn't seen to the end, right, from the original idea, it just fell apart at the end. And now the whole franchise is looked at as subpar because they didn't take it all the way through. They cut corners there at the end. So a great example of that is like for Tidal Blades 2, which is in production now. If anybody's watching this, and don't come at me, I know it's been a long time, but hey, when I started that project, I worked at Skybound and I had a team of 8, and then I left and it was just me for 2 years. So, bandwidth goes down. Tidal Blades 2 is a campaign narrative first dungeon crawl, right? I think the narration and the narrative is going to blow people away. Why? Because it's not generic, right? So much of the stuff that we consume is generic, and it's generic because coming up with original, like really truly original stuff, takes a lot more time. And for the most part, like I got a great example of that working at Skybound. When you have a team of 8, you've got to pay those salaries, right? So games have to come out on time because you need that product to land in that quarter because you need money to pay the bills, right? I wanted to get away from that. I couldn't stand it. I hated it. That's not the way I wanted to create. That's why I've kept it small. I just recently hired Maddie because I absolutely just was drowning and needed help. But I don't want the pressure. Do we have a product for the fourth quarter? I never want that to factor in. Right. And so with that said, with Tidal Blades 2, we've already planned 2 expansions for that game. Now, obviously, we're hoping that the base game does well enough to warrant those. But what it does is we've laid out the storyline and the narrative for those 2 expansions already. And what it does is it lets you, like, we look at it as like seasons of a show that would be on Netflix, right? The first box is season 1, the next expansion is season 2, season 3. I think a 3-arc season is a beautiful, like nice little, it's built that way. I mean, all the really great books are kind of in a 3-series arc. It's when they like, oh, you're really popular, you should make a 4th book, and you read that 4th book and you're like, what the hell's going on? Like, and that's there's a reason for that, right? Like you can only take a story so far before you start having to do a bunch of additive things. So for us, we laid this out. We put a strong emphasis on, and we'll spend countless hours building out the story before we even apply the first mechanic to the next expansion. Because we feel like if the story's nice and tight, we're happy with where the story is and the story that we want to tell, then it makes making the mechanics, you don't have to retrofit anything, right? It's like now just apply the mechanic of what we're doing going forward and make it all sing. And that brings it all full circle to making it sing, right? So there's how many times have you played a game where you like the mechanic and they've got a theme on it, but you're like, this theme really doesn't have anything to do with what I'm doing. It doesn't really have anything to do with what's happening here. And I have no interest in the little prologue they gave me setting the scene, and then I just play the game, right? And we want to avoid that. We want to build worlds where you see yourself in one of those characters, you make a connection to a character, you want to go to a convention and cosplay as a character. To us, that just makes the games better, And so that's our goal anyway. Even with a game like Wonderland's War that was always intended to be a one-off, we still built a ton of narrative around like why is Wonderland at war? What caused that? What's happening? Actually, currently trying to pitch Wonderland's War to audio companies to do an audio podcast series with about the theme and the narrative of Wonderland's War. Actually, maybe it's not signed yet, but we're essentially signed with an agency that's going to be shopping it out to Audibles and the places that do these things. And I'm really excited. I really want that to happen because it doesn't have anything to do with board games, really, not to them, right? Yeah. Not to these people, but we've made something so inspiring that they're willing to like put it in a totally different medium, which I think is great.
That's so cool. Transmedia storytelling is the way of the future. It's so fun to see a story in one media or format and then jump over somewhere else. I can see.
I mentioned Bloodstone earlier. The whole idea behind Bloodstone 2 from the beginning was, and this is where there was kind of, looping back to that conversation about Bloodstone, we hired an author and we made a novel, right? We made a novel to introduce the world of Bloodstone because, again, I had a 3-game thing in my head. This was game 1, and I wanted a book to go along with each game. So it's like, here's 3 books, tells this whole story that I built in my head around the world of Bloodstone, and here's games to play with it as well. And in the first campaign, I was just dropping these big chunks of lore, because I was really trying to world build from the onset. And it's tough, right? Because they didn't have a reason to care about the world. And so with me leading with all this narrative and this lore, people were like, so what's the game about? What are we doing? Like, where's my new plastic stretch goal upgrades? So, learned a hard lesson there first. I need to get something in people's hands to get them to care about why the world might be important to them. But even if you go back and you should go look it up, the Bloodstone trailer.
Cool.
It's 3 minutes. It's fully animated in terms of like what board game people can produce. Wrote an original song, composed a song.
When was this? How did I miss this?
I don't know.
I follow all your shit, so I don't know how I missed it.
I don't know.
That blows my mind.
We spent a lot of money making this 3-minute video because I essentially wanted it to feel like, when Blizzard would do a trailer drop for a new expansion.
Yeah.
Like, it should feel that epic, right? Like it should really like blow people's minds and like, I can't wait for the game. Yeah. And I really wanted to set the tone for the world, right? Narratively. So I think we did that, and I think it's amazing, and I love it, and I'm glad I did it, but I'll never do it again. Oh my God. It was like making a game, but we just did a video, and then, that 3-minute trailer is just in the wind now. So,
I'll find it somewhere.
No, it's on YouTube. You can easily find it. I just mean the effort and the amount of money and bandwidth that it took to pull off that 3-minute animated storytelling song, working with it was a lot. There was a lot of contractors, a lot of work that could have been put into something else. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
I had that experience, but I'm not doing that again.
Now, you learn shit.
Absolutely.
The idea, they popped in my head, grab Jim Zub, Max Dunbar, and get them to do a Wonderland's War comic book run. That would be cool. Bright, colorful.
It's funny you bring up Jim Zub. Like, we are actually, at one point, trying to make a board game out of, forget which one. It's his dungeon, the D&D dungeon crawler.
Skulldiggers.
Skulldiggers. Skull Crusher.
I can't see it from here, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That one. We actually looked at working with him while it was Skybound because he does some stuff. Skybound's really into comics because, the boss man did a little thing called Walking Dead and Invincible. Those little guys. And Jim was a fan and a friend. And yeah, we looked at that one for a while. So they mentioned Jim's up.
Cool. So, as a designer and a world builder who prioritizes those authentic connections around the table, how do you go about ensuring that the world building that's going into a board game fosters those connections and leans into that idea of building actual human interaction as opposed to strictly just a game?
Well, I think the world building, there's some sort of energy or magic that happens when you're excited about an IP. And I say IP loosely, just like plug in Transformers or Lord of the Rings, whatever, right? Or The Hobbit, as I'm sitting here drinking coffee out of my Hobbit door mug. There's some amount of energy that just brings hype to the individual people before they even do the first mechanic, right? I mean, there's games that we probably wouldn't even be that excited to play, but you're like, well, they put it in Star Wars. It's a Star Wars world, and I really do like Star Wars, so I'll check that game out. Yeah. You might get the game, and the game might be just okay, but you're like, man, I really just like being able to run around as Luke Skywalker. That feels fun to me. So I think there's some magic we get from worlds and world building and stories and narratives that we can't get from the real world. I think that's why, video games are so addictive with accomplishments in the worlds we're in, because we can, and in books, we go to a different place, we get away from our mundane, and we get to plug in. And so I think when world building is done well, you sprinkle, was it the Cook Bay guy with his salt? Like, you're just like, you're salting good mechanics with just extra flavor that, I think you still have to be mechanic first as far as like making the game. Mm-hmm. But if the game mechanic is good, then good world building is just like, it's more than icing on the cake, right? It's like, it's a part of the cake, but you get my point.
I do. And I'm going to go off on a tangent on a side here because you bring up something interesting in my brain. In the digital game development, because I've been taking a bunch of narrative design courses and stuff, there is this concept of what's called the story stack, where the player fantasy, the mechanics, all these other things are far more important. And then when you get to the bottom of the stack, it's the actual narrative that's the most flexible, that can be changed, that can be thrown out if you have to. I'm curious if there's an analog in board games. Is the story, while it's important and it's good for skinning, is it the most flexible thing? Is it the last thing to consider? Do you come at mechanics first and then story later? Or in board games, can you flip and flop a little more?
I think you can flip and flop. I find that hard to I probably, in the 30, 40 minutes we've already been talking, I've kind of like laid out that you can probably see the passion behind narrative and world building. So I think I'd have a hard time just going, this mechanic's great, but the world doesn't fit. Let's just strip this off and do something else. Even though I said I did that earlier with Wonderland's War, but that was only because those games didn't really already have anything with them and were still pretty malleable. I'd find that pretty hard. I do think the narrative can be flexible, and I do think it can move probably easier than a mechanic can, right? Because you can almost explain away anything. But the problem is, if you start trying to explain away something in a way that it's not cohesive with the other things in the world, or like, does that contradict what we said earlier? Then you start to sprinkle in with your salt, like, something disgusting, right? Broccoli or I don't know. And it pulls people out. It pulls people out of that magic. You're like, wait a minute. I think I don't want to get into the Star Wars debacle of the last few years. I didn't mind the movies, but I can see why some people like got pulled out of the world. Like there's contradictions, there's things that don't make sense. And had they executed a narrative that flowed, right, there wouldn't been a lot of the uproar. I don't really care to get into why people think that happened because I don't think that's necessary. But that's just the way it is with stories, right? Going back to the Game of Thrones, right? They didn't do a good job of being true to a character to the end, and people called them out on it. Like, why is she doing this? Oh, because she's a crazy lady? Like that, what? That's not the way she's been for 8 years or 8 seasons. Right. So no, I mean, yeah, I think so. Probably more so than mechanics, because sometimes if you change a mechanic, there's a hell of a cascade effect that can happen. We see that in development of games, right? We should change this. This will make this part of the game so much better. It'll fix this. Then you plug that new change in and you go play test it, and you're like, there's a problem here. There's a problem here. It caused this to happen. So now do we domino effect? Do we change these other things down the line to make it work with the thing that we just changed? Or do we just back it up? Okay, that didn't work. And there's a lot of that in mechanics. So I would say probably it's the most flexible, but also I think it's one of the easiest places you can screw up because you're going to contradict yourself or make something not make sense.
Gotcha. As a designer and a world builder and a creator, what's your preference? Do you prefer to start with mechanics or do you prefer to start with theme?
I prefer theme.
Yes.
Theme, I think, again, I've discussed this a little bit, right? Like, for me, if we can build a strong narrative theme all the way through, then I feel like that inspires the mechanic and brings it true. Now, with that said, there's been plenty of times I've got a mechanic that we're like, cool, this mechanic now inspires the world that we want to build around it. So, I think for me, my brain just is always dabbling in daydreaming into worlds that aren't like, I just, the whole lose a memory to fuel the magic thing.
That's cool. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there's a book about that somewhere and I'm actually just like grabbing, I don't remember it, but like,
I don't,
there's lots of, anyway, when I go on my walks with my dog, it's just my brain's floating in the clouds. And so like, that's just where I'm at. But I know plenty of designers that like they have, Jonathan Gilmour has like 200 designs of games on the shelf. They don't even have themes. They're just game mechanics that he's built games around. They're just sitting on the shelf waiting for a theme and a production. So I think everybody's brain just works a little differently.
100%. I've had the same conversation with Jonathan, with Doug Lewandowski, with Gavin Brown, and y'all have slightly different answers. So it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So board games offer sometimes, anyways, I've seen it occasionally, the unique opportunity for a player to actually engage in the world building, where they can change things that happen during the course of the play that actually changes the world for them. And setting aside legacy games, where obviously you're a very important part of the world building, where you're tearing up cards or writing things on the board itself. But in your opinion, have you seen excellent executions of the idea of allowing players to influence the world in board games?
I think my head always goes to like a choose your own adventure type approach. I think I loved those books growing up. It actually, as someone who didn't read a lot growing up, like the first time I read one of those CYA books, I was like, I get to control where this is going. I mean, there wasn't much control really, right? When you really pull it back and look at it, we were still going to the same ending. It was just a different path to get there. But I think the games that allow us those choices, that's what we want in games. We want agency. That's what we want in the world. We want agency. That's what gets us so frustrated with the real world is these systems are in place that don't give us agency. You don't feel like you have a choice. And, you know, you just have to plow forward and hope for the best. And I think in our media, when we get to have agency, it's really rewarding. Again, I just loop that back to video games and in the case of board games. And to your specific question about ones that give us that's done that well, I don't know. I think D&D is probably the best one, right? Like
there you go.
When you look at, and I'm actually in my first campaign of D&D. I've done several one shots over the years, but I've never done a campaign. And we're about halfway. I think we're about halfway. I don't know. I'm not the DM through Curse of Strahd.
Oh, nice.
And I get it now. Like I get why people make D&D their whole personality. I get it. But like one of our teammates likes to do stupid, weird stuff, you know, just out of nowhere. And so there's I don't want to give, if anybody hasn't done, he just like killed this random bird one time. And then so the DM later was like, by the way, Ian, that random bird you killed was a major plot point. And I've had to totally turn this another direction because of your randomness. And so, of course, now we all take that character whenever we enter a new town or we do anything. We're like, we bind his hands and we keep his mouth shut. Wow. But no, that agency, I think D&D, it's like the ultimate CYA, right? Like, and it's tougher to do in board games. It's tougher because of the material and the way that we have to do things. Like we have a few points in Tidal Blades 2 where you get to kind of a CYA where you come to a decision point, you're given two scenarios and you only have time to pick one. And that's the next session that you go to and you don't go back to the previous one. But it's tough, right? Because now we've designed a whole other session that didn't get played, right? And that's and there's material that go with that and there's play testing, but to give that moment of agency, that's what it takes, you know. You got to kind of sacrifice some of that. So, yeah.
I think the Descent series did that really well. Like they allowed the scenarios that followed or based on choices you make, but that's basically stripped down D&D on a board. So
that definitely influenced. I mean, Gloomhaven, you know, you got a lot of like, there's so many good narrative campaigns, I think, that are out there that kind of give you some choices. But yeah, I think D&D is probably the king. They got the crown on that one.
Strahd is a hell of a campaign to start for your first campaign, too.
Yeah, I have no idea, you know. Well, I just know I've played a lot of Baldur's Gate 3. Oh, my God. That thing is like, it's amazing.
Right.
And we started a little bit before that or whatever, but I was like, oh, man, I'm not used to what's happening in the Curse of Strahd because of Baldur's Gate probably ruined me. I'm like, where's my magic? I don't have a magic flaming sword, and I don't have any +2 armor that does blah, 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 you know? Like, where's the stuff? And he's like, you just got to figure out what you can figure out with what has been given you. I'm like, damn it, why am I still not leveled yet? We've killed like 3 things. Like, why am I not leveling?
So obviously world building in board games involves finding a balance somewhere between accessibility and ease of picking it up without having to read through a huge tome of lore and background, but also offering enough depth and to create something meaningful and entertaining. How do you balance that? How do you ensure that it's engaging and fun without scaring them off with too much?
Well, I kind of told you earlier, I did scare people off with the Bloodstone lore, right? Like we jumped in hot and heavy, you know, pages of lore right out of the gate in the daily updates. And I don't know how to do that. To be perfectly honest, right? I think at the end of the day, you've got to make something that's intriguing and you've got to have some sort of hook. And with all art and all artists, you know, you make stuff and you see what sticks and what people connect with. With Tidal Blades, I think people have connected because we don't see a lot of bright worlds in board games, right? We're used to the D&D approach of dark fantasy. And so when people saw Waterworld and a different approach, I mean, again, it's not like this is the first Waterworld bright thing that's ever been made. But I think once you get outside the mold of some of the stuff that people normally always see, it helps. Whereas, say, like Bloodstone, like it's right on cue. It's dark fantasy, right? So, like, okay, we've seen this 1,000 times, James. Oh, there's a magic stone that does magic stuff. Yay, you know. Whereas I think with Tidal Blades, that bright world really drew people in. And then even like with Wonderland's War, you know, it's a pretty original take on that very well known Alice in Wonderland approach, right? And like it's whimsical world. It's a silly world. They would never be at war. Like, what does that even mean? Mm-hmm. So then your interest is piqued and you want to see, what's that about? Let me go deeper into that. So, I think it's your hook. I think you got to get your hook, done. And there's going to be lots of hooks that are intriguing, but, I mean, how many books have you started, read the first 3 or 4 chapters and you just couldn't get into it? It happens. But then the next person next to you is like, this is my favorite book ever. So
yeah, that happens too.
Yeah. So that's a tough one. I don't think there's a magic formula to it.
Because I played so much I love Tidal Blades so much. I'm going to gush. I'm not going to fanboy, but for me, from the outside looking in, it's got a great hook, but B, there's also these individual characters that you can identify with and you can be like, this is my guy. I like this guy. So that's huge, I think, as well. And there's also the bright, the color, the way it looks, and the way it all holds to the same theme, whether it's how it's written, how it's designed, how it looks. So I think it's a very cohesive package that knows what it is and leans into that really well. And you see so many things that are like, okay, I want to be this, but I want to be a little bit of this, and then I'm going to do this for marketing, and I'm going to worry about this. And something this is what I am. I'm unapologetically bright and fun and family, and that's like, yeah, sign me up. That's the good stuff.
I mean, and even with like when you go back to Grimm Forest, which David and Lena, Mr. Cuddington, did the art for that as well. I think one of the things that we try to do with the art approach to that world was it's dark, but also still seems accessible for the family. Because, hey, aren't this the 3 Little Pigs? But also, like, I'm a full-grown adult, and do I want to play a 3 Little Pigs game? But you look at Grimm Forest, you're like, yeah, I'll play that, right? And that was the fence we were trying to straddle with that and I was actually told by some people like, hey, that's not a good idea. You need to know your audience. You need to jump into the pond with both feet into either category, either make it dark or either make it, a family game. And I was like, but I want to make a family game that the adults don't mind playing. That was the whole point, right? Like, and you've played Grimm Forest, right? All you got to do as a choice is decide which of the 3 or 4 areas you're going to, and then stuff happens from there. So for kids, you don't have to explain a whole lot to them. Pick a card and then look at the stuff. And then, kids are going to be like, I want all that stuff. So I'm going there, I'm going to the forest. But then a couple times into it and they have to split it with a bunch of people and they're like, that didn't work out. And then it makes them start thinking critically, which is great. That's what board games should do. So, but yeah, world building is so fun to me. It's, it's my favorite part of making the games. And like, I have these meetings with Mr. Cuddington regularly where we're just going through that narrative that I was talking about for the 2nd and 3rd expansion. And I just walk away from those meetings energized, and it helps me bring more energy into like the more boring parts of like, I got to do my taxes. Like, well, I don't want to do these taxes. Sucks. I definitely don't want to go through all my transactions and label every single one of them. But I'm pumped up from that meeting from earlier. So let's knock out a little bit, like it does help. It helps.
I'm right there. You mentioned Mr. Cuddington and to come back to artists, I'm curious how you've touched on it previously, but how involved do you let different artists, not just them, get involved in the world building of a game? What's the process like there?
That's a great question, because obviously I think every publisher has a much different approach. I take a very teamwork based approach. So I really give them the reins of a lot of stuff, but that's also, they've earned that. And I don't mean that other artists haven't. It's more along the lines of everybody has a different approach to how they do their work. And some people go the extra mile. Some people are just passionate, and you can typically feel that passion even through, a video call or whatever. But you typically see it in the action. Hey, if I say, hey, can I get X, and it's 3 weeks before I get it, or there's a slow response, or sure, I guess you feel like you're pulling teeth to get something, or if they're very excited and it comes the next day and whatever, right? Like you can see. So people kind of earn your trust in that area to be like, so just to be perfectly transparent, I'm working with the Cuddingtons on building a new world for a new board game series that's not Tidal Blades. It'll be a new thing that they've come up with. And I've given them full reign to be like, bring me the next world we want to go build games in. And I definitely wouldn't do that with just any art team or person. But they've proven, like, watching them work. We've done a Tidal Blades RPG that we partner with Monty Cook Games on using the Cypher system.
Yeah.
And watching them work with Shauna Germain when she was writing the book it was insane. Like, they were just as passionate and having as much fun as anything else. Now, I don't know if we'll do RPGs anymore because, oh my God, that's a lot of work. I think people just think, oh, it's just a book. It's just paper. 463-page book is many, many words. I think it's 250,000 or so. It's a lot of work and a lot of art.
Yeah.
So I think it just depends. For me, I want to surround myself with talented people, and I want to get out of their way. Like, again, looping it back to that corporate conversation from earlier, I hated that I was restrained. I could see a clear path forward that was better. But then I had this bureaucracy in my way, this red tape. Well, we've always done it this way. Okay, I don't give a shit about that. Like, why should I care? But we used to travel with horses and carriage. We don't do that anymore, right? So, like, and so I just truly believe that if you surround yourself with talented people, why would you get in their way? Like, if they're better at you than something, I mean, you're fine to ask questions about why they're doing something, but, like, for the most part, get out of their way and let them do. And so that's why I think it'll be tough for me to work with tons of new people, right? I think we're kind of getting into this comfortable space of, like, we all work well together. Like, I work well with the Eisners as far as when they do a lot of the design work. Eddington's do a lot of the world building and the art. I'm just kind of always there to pick apart everything and, like, put it together into a package that makes it a game and an IP. So I don't know. You gotta be trusting.
Yeah,
that's part of it. I don't think a lot of people trust people, or they've been burned, with somebody who said they were going to do things and they didn't follow up. So it's not easy. It's not an easy thing.
Good answer.
Yeah.
I think we had a very similar experience in the corporate world. I was a chief marketing officer for a while, and having a board or shareholders who would say, this is how we do it, and you come up with new ideas or ways to innovate, and getting it shut down. That's why I left as well. I just couldn't handle it anymore. So it's cool to see somebody who learned those lessons and are applying it to a successful enterprise these days. That makes me...
Well, it also can leave you in the fetal position in the corner. So it's, it's a crapshoot sometimes. But I think creatives are always going to approach problem solving with creative ideas, because that's just the way our brains work, right? We see things and we're like, well, we obviously are at this problem because the way that we do things has caused the problem. So we should change the way we do things to get past the problem. And I think people who are hoarding wealth and success feel security from the way they've always done things. Like, well, I'm rich and I have all these gold doubloons because of the way we've done it. So I don't want to change, and I don't want to risk this pot of gold. And so then that's where the conflict typically happens. And because they are the ones in power, they usually went out, so.
There you go.
There you go.
All right. Well, last serious question on the topic, and then we'll move into a little more fun stuff for a bit, and then we'll be at the door. But in this ever-evolving landscape of board game design and world building, how do you, James in particular, How do you stay inspired to keep pushing boundaries, to keep trying new things? You talk about that, you're getting into that comfortable. How do you push yourself to try something new? Maybe take a shot with somebody else just to see just what pushes you to keep going?
Sure. For me, I like board game mechanics that either incorporate a mixture of mechanics that we've never seen before. I'll battle quack. So battle, bag building, but we're fighting each other. Or with Sorcerer City, where you take Dominion and Carcassonne, mix in a little Galaxy Trucker, and you're like, wait a minute, you're using deck building, but with tiles, so it's a tile builder. And you're like, yeah. Like when Scott Caputo brought me that game, I was like, oh, that's got to be made. That's got to be a game. This is there's nothing like it, right? This is a genre creator. I'm surprised someone else hasn't come out with a tile building deck builder, for better or lack of better words. So to me, it's all about. I don't typically want to make games that are just slight. I call it the chimichanga effect, right? A chimichanga is just a deep fried burrito. So the only difference between a burrito and a chimichanga is dropping it in oil, right? And we see that in so many games where, oh, this is just like blah, but they added blah.
Right.
So for me, it's more like, and people say, well, James, this is just semantics. Your games are just a slight variation of blah. But for me, it's got to have more than just 1 degree of separation. It's got to have multiple degrees of separation. Then I'll get the people who go, oh, yeah, you put in a whole bag of ingredients here. Now it's too complicated. You're like, okay, all right. Either end of the spectrum, I can't please everybody. But I do think it's iterating off, standing on the shoulders of the people who came before us, right? Like I am going to have to go buy Isaac Childress a drink and a vegan meal because, Tidal Blades 2 is definitely standing on the shoulders of Jaws of the Lion, right? Like there's so much inspiration that came from Jaws of the Lion, specifically Jaws of the Lion, because of like when you see our map books, when you see the way that the story goes. And I think that's what we should do. I think that's what art should do. Art should inspire us. Like I was saying earlier, I'm reading whatever I'm watching, right? Should inspire us and want to make you want to dabble, in that area. I think once that starts to fade, I think that's when you're probably ready for retirement. I think that's when you're done. Either that or you're in a lull and you got to just go find a way to break out of the lull. So, yeah.
Right on. Well, that brings us to the end of the serious shit. So I have a question that I ask everybody that comes on here, regardless of what industry you're from. This question is, in my opinion, there exists a sacred space, a shared space that's at the intersection of story and game, obviously, but also improv comedy, comic book writing, screenplays, all of this stuff, where we can all just sit down and hang out and get together and share a drink and talk. There's a natural connection here. If you agree with my little theory, what is the magical thread that holds all this together?
So I will have to give credit to Rodney from Watch It Played. Because I actually did a show called Starting Roll that's on YouTube out in the world when I was at Skybound. And it was an interview series where people would bring in a game and they would talk about their kind of like what got them into gaming and that magical process. And Rodney was our first episode. And Rodney talked about that where in the world, in reality, do we ever have a set of shared rules that we agree on to do a thing for a certain amount of time that we all 100% agree on? It doesn't happen, right? And so he's like, a board game facilitates. He's like, he used this really, it's funny. It's a funny phrase. It's social lubricant. You sit down with these rules, you tell everybody the rules, and they all nod their head. We agree. We are going to play this thing in this way for the next 45 minutes. Let's go. And that facilitates this magic that you're referring to, this connection that we have. And I think we all yearn for that connection. It's just incredibly hard to get. It's incredibly hard to get in the real world because work, like we've talked about those buddings, right? Like we're not connecting there. Now we're fighting. Politics, social issues, relationships, and the stress that comes with all that stuff. Board games give us this moment where all of that angst is removed, and I think we really love it. I think that's what we fall in love with, and that's why we have a new tagline for Druid City Games, and it was inspired from Wonka after I went and watched Wonka, but it's along the lines of it's not the board game that matters, it's the people that you play it with. Because at the end of the day, I'll play any board game with you. I don't really even care. I don't care about winning because I'm addicted to that space while we're playing. And I know that's not everybody, but the people that resonates with, they're the people who are going to probably enjoy my games.
Amen. I love that. There's a follow-up question I don't always ask, but sometimes I do when it fits, and it fits here, is considering that as a creator, as a designer and publisher, you're creating something that facilitates that social lubricant. I love that. Mm-hmm. What responsibility does that put on your shoulders as storytellers, as creators of these things? What does that mean for us?
I think it's a ton of responsibility. I don't think it's just hey, I need to make a game that makes money so I can pay the rent next month. I mean, that's obviously part of the equation. But like one of the things I as a guy from growing up in Alabama, right? Probably not the most diverse area of the world. I have a lot of layers that have to be kind of peeled off, right? From the raising and the atmosphere that I grew up in. And one of the things I learned in my time at Skybound was, I don't always have the best ideas. And I have a very narrow perspective of the world. And I need other diverse perspectives to help me world build the best way possible. And when you like let your, defenses drop and you bring in those outside voices and you listen, even when it kind of feels uncomfortable and hurts a little bit, it makes better storytelling. It makes better worlds. It makes better narratives. And it makes better product. So anybody who's listening to this, who's a player and like, I don't need any of that woke bullshit in my games. It's not about being woke. It's not about arbitrarily forcing something into the storyline. Diverse perspective makes for better worlds and storytelling. And that, if you want better experiences at the table with the worlds that you're engaging in, then you should want diverse storytelling creatives.
I love that, dude.
Yeah, I keep going, but I'm going to stop it there.
Oh, I love it. Well, that brings us to the end of the series questions, and all we got left to do is I got a little quick fire I like to do just to get to know James a little better. Top of your head, just quick answers.
Sure.
What are you currently playing? What are you playing these days?
We're playing a lot of Super Mega Lucky Box. It's just a 20-minute game. Like, I love those kind of games. It's like, okay, it's after dinner. Everybody wants to kind of go to their corner of the house and get on their electronic or whatever. But like, hey, let's take 20 minutes. Let's get a game out. And this one, it's like if Bingo was retrofitted for gamers, right? So it takes Bingo and just adds, a few layers to it that makes it fun. It's quick, easy, addictive. Don't have to learn any new rules when you're low on brain power for the end of the day. Yeah. So we're playing that a lot right now.
Very cool. I love the Oink game series for that same reason.
We keep deep sea adventures in our car for like when we go to restaurants and stuff.
Nice.
Like just break it out and play it while we're waiting for the food.
Yeah. I think we have tomato in the bottom of my wife's purse for the exact same reason.
Yep.
Very cool. What are you currently reading?
I mentioned this earlier, but I'm currently in the middle. I've actually got 2 books I'm doing right now. N.K. Jemisin with the 5th season, some good high fantasy stuff that was on my to-do list for reading. I'm a big Brandon Sanderson fan, and getting through a lot of his stuff can sometimes take time because those are big chunky books. Yeah. The other thing I'm reading is called Brainstorm. It is a book focused on the teenage brain development, as I have a 15-year-old, and I am trying to figure out how the hell I am supposed to connect with that. And approach. I like to understand the science approach of what is going on in his brain. And I think it's given me some good perspective on like, maybe I'm being too harsh in some areas and I need to give more slack in other, that sort of thing. So yeah, those are the two things I'm reading right now.
All right. If your essence was perfectly translated into a tabletop role-playing game, what race and class would you be?
I'd, probably a dwarf barbarian. Just a big dumb whack-a-mole who likes to drink beer. In my heart, I'd probably say I'm a paladin and have an oath and all that. But end of the day, good time having, and when the rage hits, you just charge forward. So probably barbarian.
Cool. Last one. If you could host a game session with any 4 people, living or dead, from any time in history, who would they be and what would you play?
All right. I've actually thought about this question before. So the pillars of things that I think are important is kind of how I ought to go. Dave Grohl, because music is amazing and I'm a music person. So give me Dave Grohl because Foo Fighters is my favorite band. Mr. Rogers, Bob Ross, and Steve Irwin. Now, I know Dave Grohl really doesn't kind of fit with those 3, but I don't care. I just think he's cool and he would jive with anybody. And I would want to play D&D and I'd want to DM them. That way, I know that's kind of cheating. I get lots of sessions out of them. I get to spend a lot of time with them. Or I'd want to play one of my games with them just to see how they kind of react to playing something that I made,
Mm-hmm. That's a cool answer. I love it. Okay, just to open up a little space, apart from what we mentioned, or mention it again, what do you have out there right now that you want to promote? What's coming that we should watch for? Where can we find you online?
So big things, I'm trying to do fun stuff that's not always just board gaming. So like I make fun shirts that are board gaming-esque. I'm working with Ben Daniel on a series of shirts. So if you ever need any cool, I use the high quality like shirt materials, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. You can find those on our website on druidcitygames.com. I've got Tidal Blades 2 is in production and will be shipping this summer. Wonderland's War, the expansion for that, just delivered, and we have that in the web store. So if anybody needs to pick up anything for that, like we mentioned earlier, got Madcala coming late summer. And then we're also working on another combo effort. I don't think I've announced this anywhere. It's called Multi-Realms. If you've heard of a little company called Wise Wizard and a little game called Star Realms, there's a little deck building card game. The team at Wise Wizard, Rob he really is a wizard when it comes to game design. He's built the best. I don't know if you are familiar with the games or not, but Star Realms and Hero Realms are like 2 deck builders. Star Realms is amazing. I've probably played 500 sessions of Star Realms because it's quick, fast, easy. It's something we always go back to, and it's still engaging even for the 500th time.
Cool.
Hero Realms is where it kind of spawned off into like, let's make it super high fantasy, make it campaign based. Got very complicated, but still fun. Multi-Realms is like he took the best of both of those and made like the perfect amalgamation of those 2 things. We're working with him to make a Wonderland's War and a Tidal Blades deck builder, 2 separate games, but with this system. So people will have a way to play these 2 games or dabble in these worlds in a deck builder that is very familiar to them, but has some new sprinkles and much easier. Wonderland's War can take 2 or 3 hours to play. But now you can have a deck builder that gets it to the table and you can play in 30 minutes. And the new system would allow you could play the Tidal Blades deck, I could play the Wonderland's War deck, and we could play each other.
That's cool.
They don't mix together, but we still use those decks to battle each other. So those are the 2 most immediate things. We're working on expansions for Wonderland's War with new factions, where I told you we're working on the expansions for Tidal Blades 2, and then building new worlds with the Cunningtons. So, the next 2 years are going to be busy.
Yeah, no doubt, dude. All right, well, that is it for all that stuff. Before we head out the door and I turn down the fire and put up the chairs, I want to give you the last words. So do you have any parting words of wisdom to put out there into the world? A cornerstone of our tenet for me is a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's why I do my best to try to give back where I can, because I truly believe that not only am I helping others, but by me helping others, it lifts me as well. So it's a little self-serving there, but I do believe that, that works for us all. And I think that's outside of just my
business and my approach to the industry. I think that's just a general thing we could all do in general. So, rising tide lifts all boats.
I'm getting reports of people passing through walls on the 3rd floor, so either I need to reboot the tavern server, or I'm going to have to hire a cleric. Either way, it's time for me to show you the door. First, a huge thank you to James. Your passion for creating memorable gaming experiences shines brightly through your innovative designs and your commitment to fostering genuine connections amongst your players. Thank you for sharing your time and wisdom. And to you, dear listener, thank you for taking a spot at the table. May you continue exploring, creating, and sharing your stories with the world. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.